Now we're joined by Jenny Durkan, who's running for mayor, so go ahead with the 2-minute introduction.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I know it's a beautiful day and there's a lot of things you could be doing, and that kind of commitment to our community is exactly the kind of thing that animates me to want to be mayor. I was born in this town, grew up here. I think we are at a real crossroads in the city. We have the fortunate position of having tremendous economic growth and vitality, but at the same time, I think that growth is creating what is some people could call two cities or two Seattles. You know, in the very shadows of some of the beautiful buildings we're building where we're really inventing the future are homeless people living in cars and tents. And we have an increasing disparity between those who can afford to live in the city and those who cannot. And I think we're also seeing that there's another number of social issues that are starting to fray our social fabric. Social justice has always animated me. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was young, and always as part of my career I have worked, I think, to improve our social system and our social justice system. Most recently, you probably know me from being U.S. Attorney. Barack Obama asked me to serve, and I was very proud to serve in that role for 5 years. Really proud to serve with Eric Holder as the Attorney General, first African American Attorney General, and I think we did a tremendous amount to transform the criminal justice system and to make it more fair. I'm very sad to see Jeff Sessions unwind all of that. For me in this city, we really work to not just use law enforcement as a tool to enforce laws, but to really see where could we improve neighborhoods, communities, and help people. One of the key areas, of course, was police reform. We were one of the first ones in the country to get ahead of that issue. A number of civil rights organizations came to our office. There'd been an ongoing problem. We had tackled it, and I'm very proud that model has worked on the streets. We have work left. There's a lot of issues around bias policing that are ongoing in this country that we need to work on. So those are the types of issues that, as your mayor, I hope to bring people together on the tough issues and not be afraid to tackle them.
Great, so now we have our 4 prepared questions that we're asking all candidates for mayor, and they're actually right in front of you if you want to turn that over and read along as we read them aloud. And Elizabeth, will you do number 1? So 2-minute answers.
What is your strategy for implementing, leveraging, and perhaps improving the incentive zoning program to create diverse neighborhoods and assure affordable housing?
That is a terrific question, and I think it is one of the things we can do as a city to really improve the dynamic of every neighborhood, but contribute. You know, housing and affordable housing is not just going to be a downtown solution or South End solution, the places we tend to do it. Every neighborhood is going to have to step up, but also work together to see what in the quality of that neighborhood is going to work. I think we also have to look at tools the city has, not just in zoning, but perhaps in property tax incentives. We're seeing now affordable rent disappearing, largely because as we vote and tax ourselves because we're such a generous city, property taxes increase, landlords increase rents, and people can't continue to afford to live there. So one of the things I think we have to look at is property tax incentives for those landlords who will provide affordable housing. I think we have to also look at, you know, working with neighborhoods, not just imposing on neighborhoods. Where are those areas where we can have more mother-in-laws or duplexes or triplexes to really continue having a neighborhood fabric, but seeing if we can add more density at the same time.
Great, then number 2.
In your view, what is the city's role in assuring equal educational achievement opportunity in Seattle's public schools?
You know, I think it's a really difficult thing when the city has such a critical role in education, but yet the school board controls it. And I think we have to re-examine those connections as a city. But there's things we have done and have to continue to do. Number 1, pre-K. You know, universal pre-K, I think, is not just an important issue. I think it should be a universal right. And I think if we're looking to the future and what families need, we have to have it. Our pre-K initiative, as you know, we did the initiative and funded it ourselves. It expires. But we have to work with the schools and find better ways so that every kid has a chance to excel and not get left behind. I think we're more and more balkanizing again into neighborhoods and locales. We have so many languages that are spoken in the public schools. The future of this city is our kids. There's just no question about that. And I think we have to find ways to work with the school board. And I think also to re-examine whether that's the most efficient way to work in schools. One thing I think we can't do is blame teachers. You know, I was a high school teacher for 2 years in between college and law school. And teaching school is one of the hardest jobs there is. You're required to be not just teacher, but social worker, sometimes absentee parent, you name it, you have every single role. And more, I think we have not done enough to support our teachers. Going back to the last question on affordability, when we're talking about affordable housing, teachers, firefighters, policemen that work in the city, they should be able to afford and live in this city. And I think we have to find tools that we have as a city to maybe target some of those populations and make sure that they can continue to do that. Because I think it's really a crime that we're seeing this growing disparity, and the people who are doing one of the most important jobs are the people who are not paid enough and not getting the services and social supports they need. So those are some of the things I would work for as mayor.
Sophia, number 3.
What are your specific recommendations for completion and follow-up steps of the Seattle Police Department consent decree and ongoing steps to improve department relations with Seattle's residents?
This is a really good question. We have, I care deeply about this issue, having worked on it and forged the agreement with the city. We reached initial compliance, which means as it's set up, you reach initial compliance and you have a 2-year testing to make sure that it's really taken root. I think too many people miss the fact how much we've accomplished. When we did our investigation, I'm a very data-driven person. We have to have our goals, but we have to figure out how to reach there. So we did a lot of work with community groups. What did they need? Where were the gaps between the police and the community? Both working closely with the police themselves and getting their input, and the communities, all parts of the city, because every neighborhood's a little bit different in its interactions. And what we found is we took that experience and then matched it against the data. 75% of the time when an officer used force, it was used against someone either in mental health crisis or under the impacts of abuse, drugs or alcohol. 75% of the time. You take that data, what we then said is our key criteria then is let's change how we deal in the streets on that and really work on crisis intervention. Not just training police officers more so they can recognize us and know how to deal with people to de-escalate it, but wrapping around the social services we need to get those people into treatment immediately, to avert them from the criminal justice system. Our jails are not the place to put people with mental health treatments. So we have to continue our commitment to that framework, because if we don't continue to that, it is now reduced, went from 75% to a small fraction of that. It's saving lives on the street. We have to continue our commitment to that kind of approach between police and community. At the same time, I think one of the things that is not yet done, and will never be done, is that ongoing work on racial social justice issues. Race is the toughest issue in this country. We don't like to face it, but we have to.
Okay, Brittany, number 4.
What is your strategy for dealing with homelessness in Seattle?
The strategy for dealing with homelessness, I think, has to be multi-tiered and multi-leveled. And it has to realize that this homeless is not a monolithic society. People end up on the streets for very, very different reasons and at different times in their lives. When I was a young lawyer working in DC, I volunteered at a women's shelter every other week for a long period of time. And working with those people there, for me, was instructive. There was one woman who, when she was off her meds, seemed just crazy, Lola. No one would talk to Lola. I worked with her. She had the same story reoccurring over and over and over again. So finally I thought, okay, I'll look into it. Turned out she had been illegally evicted. She had lost all of her property. And I was able to bring an action against the landlord and get her damages. We pressured Section 8 housing. We got housing for her. We got an award for her. The first thing she spent her money on was to buy herself a cemetery plot, because what terrified her living on the street was she would die somewhere and no one would know who she was. So when we look at the homeless population, we have to realize, first, respect and dignity. These are people who are there not through their choices. Sometimes people, you will say it's a choice, but if we don't have treatment, we will not deal with issues. And that's mental health treatment, and it is substance abuse. We're in the middle of an opiate crisis that is off the charts, that I tried to deal with as U.S. Attorney in many ways, but it's a social issue. And then we have to look at cohorts. Mom and kids living in cars, unacceptable. We have to focus on those. I was just reading C is for Crank, and she got the public document showing how much we've spent just in the last 2 months as a city on homeless issues. Over $2 million spent on cleanup, hauling away tons of garbage. That's not a solution, and it's not sustainable. Those are funds that need to be directed to social services And a friend who did fisheries work for a long time said, in the environment, what do fish need most? And they said, fish need a river, homeless need a home.
Great, so now we'll open it up to follow-up questions. These are 1-minute answers, and we'll start with Elizabeth.
So what is your vision for Seattle, and what are your thoughts on mandatory inclusionary housing?
My vision for Seattle is that we continue to attract vibrant, diverse economic companies while keeping the kind of small businesses that I think make the culture of all of our neighborhoods. You know, every one of those small businesses who provide work for themselves, for others, that really provide, you know, when you walk out to go to the local restaurant or the local shop or whatever the store is. So I think we have to build to make sure that we keep that kind of diverse economic foundation here. And we've got to also be connected to our waterfront and our heritage as a seaport, because I think that also is part of what Seattle is. Our environmental resources are tied to that as well. But my vision is also the vision for a city that doesn't seem as polarized as it is today because of the growing changes. There are a lot of disenfranchised people who feel like this city doesn't take care of them or speak for them in their futures. So we have to pull ourselves together on that, provide better housing and opportunity.
Great, additional questions? Brittany and then John.
At an event last week or a few nights ago, you were photographed holding up a sign indicating that you were saying yes in support of sweeping homeless encampments. Is that in fact your view, and can you expand upon it if so?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I hate those just yes, no's for complicated questions. I felt that some of the answers before people held up maybe not the most honest. I will tell you, I think illegal encampments are not the answer, and the city needs to continue to move people out of illegal encampments. So that is why I held up the sign. But it has to all be tied together. There is no one solution. First, you have to have somewhere to put the people. They have to have somewhere to live. Second, we have to provide services, both mental health services and addiction treatment services. You know, a number of people living on the street, you know, if you read the various studies, it looks like a majority of them are suffering from particular opiate addictions and heroin. You know, one of my younger brothers has spent the last year documenting homeless encampments and the life on the streets. It's wrong. In a city as vibrant and as economically successful as this, we have to take better care of people. So I hate the word sweep. I would not do it as a heartless meaning thing, but I think we have to move people out of these dangerous encampments to other solutions.
John and then Liz.
You were able to raise a good amount of money in a short amount of time. If you were to win and be running again in 4 years, when the Democracy Voucher Program applies to the mayor's race, would you participate in that program?
Absolutely, and I'd be so happy to do it. Yeah, I think the democracy voucher, I will admit, I was skeptical. I thought, I'm not sure about this idea, but I think it's had this great impact of having people to reach out to everyone. And the other most important side of it is, the people who have them suddenly have a say, and they're more invested. Seeing voting histories over the years, you know, they're expecting maybe this, you know, even these charged crimes, the turnout's only gonna be 30 to 40% in our primary. We need more people participating, and if they can participate in that direct way and feel like the people own the people they elect, and nobody else, I think that's a really great thing.
Liz and then Ben.
Hi. So I work with LEAD, and I'm now sitting on the advisory committee for oversight, law enforcement oversight for the county sheriff's office as well. And so the personality of the mayor's office matters very much as we're running our programs. So in 6 years, I am wondering, as I'm 6 years into this, how your administration will balance being very engaged and coming to the table without trying to shift the program over to the mayor's office's agenda.
The beauty of things like LEAD is they grew organically from the people who cared. And so I think the worst thing that can happen, and I've been in and around government my whole time, is government decides it's going to take over something and then it basically suffocates it. I think the solutions we have today in all of our cities are going to have to come greatly from the cities and greatly from the communities. We're gonna have to organically grow solutions for, you know, things that are gonna work in Magnolia, Queen Anne, Fremont, may not work in other parts of the city. You know, we have very different neighborhoods. Capitol Hill, West Seattle, downtown's now a neighborhood. And a one-size-fits-all doesn't work. And so when people who are the best and care enough to come up with some alternatives that might work, I think we gotta grow pilots. I think LEAD is terrific. I think we should try to duplicate it. It's already a model across the country. But we have to, you know, we are facing the Trump administration right now, and they are gonna cut everything we care about. The last thing we can do is kill the things that are working here.
Ben?
The law firm you work with has represented Shell when they fought to drill for oil and in the Arctic, and Uber when they were accused of misleading customers. Why do you work with this firm, and who will you represent as mayor? Will you represent corporations or the people in Seattle?
Great question. My law firm is 700 plus people. Everyone works in very different things. I never worked for Shell. We're actually also suing Uber right now. We represent Google and are suing them relating to autonomous vehicles. So it's a very diverse partnership that does a lot of device work. Let me tell you some of the work I've done since I've been there. The first day that the Trump administration imposed the immigration ban, I got a call from some folks I worked with at the Port of Seattle because I was helping them work on some security issues there. And they said, we just got this order banning people. They're stuck. We don't know what to do. I got in my car. I drove to the airport. On the way there, I called the people who are some of the best, I think, in the area, Northwest Immigration Project with Jorge Barron, who is, I don't know if you know him, he's amazing. And ACLU, who happened to be in a board meeting, and I said, I'm going to the airport, there's people stuck in detention, we don't know how many who, they're gonna need their own lawyers. And we went down there and working on a pro bono basis, cleared by the law firm, worked for the day, and we got, I think, the first injunction in the country that prohibited Trump from deporting people he shouldn't. So I'm proud of that work.
So I have one, and then Elizabeth again. So what are your thoughts on a city income tax or other progressive revenue sources?
I think we have the most regressive taxation system in this state, and we need to change it. I voted for the income tax. I think that the challenge to the income tax of the city right now may provide the city with an important tool. I've sat and talked to people now about why they're doing the challenge. As a lawyer, I'm skeptical about whether they'll succeed, but I think we can't just look at the income tax. If you look at us as a city and as a state, we have to look at the B&O tax. It is really hurting our small businesses. We have to look at property taxes because we're taxing and taxing and taxing ourselves in property taxes, and as this increases, particularly elder people, the amount of deduction they can get, they're being priced out of their own homes. And so I think that we have to have a holistic review because look, the McCleary decision, you know, it's a crime that we're not funding education in the state, and that our state Supreme Court has said stop, and we can't do it because of the way we tax.
Elizabeth, final question.
Yeah, so you didn't get a chance to answer. What are your thoughts on mandatory inclusionary housing?
I think it might be able to work, but I think the devil's in the details. I think that when you say that phrase, like anything else, people take different things away from it. And so some people think it means, okay, you have to do this bundle of rights. Others think you have to do this. So I think really the devil's gonna be in the details. Do you mean, you know, by mandatory inclusionary housing, is it anytime you build new housing, within that housing itself, there has to be those units? And sometimes that might work, but sometimes it doesn't work. I personally believe every time government tries to impose a one-size-fits-all for every neighborhood and every type of housing, it ends up having more negative impacts than positive impacts. I think it can be a tool, and we can't exclude it as a tool, but I don't think it's a overall solution.
Right, so we're out of time. If you want to take 30 seconds for a closing statement.
I want to thank you all for being here. I know that your commitment to community is super important. You know, running for mayor is hard, harder than I thought it would be. But as I go around and talk to people, winning the race in many ways is the first step, but governing is what's going to be really hard. And that's where, if I'm fortunate enough to win, I'm going to come back to places like this and say, look, You sat in that room all day with no windows because you cared. Now it's time to show how you cared, because I need your help doing X or Y or Z. Because we have to govern from the bottom up. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So as your mayor, if I'm lucky enough to get there, I'm gonna need you. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.